So let me start by acknowledging the concerns raised by the public over NRIC policy. The BizFile incident is unfortunate. Without intending to, it may have led the public to believe that the government is changing its policy to allow full NRIC numbers to be exposed on a wide scale. This is not the case. We take the public's concerns very seriously and are very sorry that the mistake has caused them much anxiety. I want to reassure the public that NRIC numbers remain personal data. NRIC numbers can only be collected when there is a need to do so. Organizations that collect NRIC numbers also have a duty of care. Subject to applicable law, they must notify and seek consent on use and ensure protection of the data. These are existing guidelines that will not change. However, there are also some incorrect uses of the NRIC number today. Our plan was to stop these incorrect uses while the problem is relatively contained. Doing so will better protect everyone and allow us to use NRIC numbers with confidence. In this regard, my statement today will address two issues: the current incorrect uses of NRIC numbers and why we need to change, and what our next steps will be. So when we interact with others daily, we are identified by our names. However, our names may not be unique. For organizations that deal with many people, say a hospital with several patients named John Tan, they need a better way to uniquely identify them. Their NRIC number is a useful, unique identifier in such situations. When the hospital needs to perform an operation or dispense medication, the doctor or nurse must make absolutely sure that it is the right John Tan they are dealing with, and they should ask you, what is your NRIC number? Since the NRIC number's purpose is to be a unique identifier, it cannot be a secret, just as our names are not secret. I should emphasize, however, that while your NRIC number is not a secret, it is not meant to be widely disclosed. This is the concern echoed in Mr. Lim Biao-Chuan's question. We would only disclose our NRIC number under certain circumstances, for example, when required by law. Some examples include disclosing our NRIC number to our employers, at the clinic, or when we subscribe to a mobile telephone line. Because we do have to disclose our NRIC number to others for such purposes, we must assume that at least some people know our NRIC number. Over time, however, NRIC numbers have become increasingly used as more than an identifier. Previously, organizations would require seeing my physical NRIC card to confirm that I am who I claim to be. However, some organizations assume that if someone can cite my NRIC number, that person must be me. This is clearly wrong. On the assumption that this person is indeed me, some organizations may go further to give the person access to privileged information or services. When used this way, my NRIC number is no longer just an ID or identifier, but a key to unlock more information or services. In such situations, the NRIC number is being accepted as an authenticator or proof of who a person claims to be. This is clearly inappropriate. Instead of the full NRIC number, some organizations collect and use a partial NRIC number, usually the last 4 characters of the NRIC number. They think this is safe, and that revealing only the last 4 characters still keeps the full NRIC number secret. Among public agencies, even when the agencies had the full NRIC numbers, the use of masked NRIC numbers became more common. Besides organizations, some individuals also started to use their NRIC numbers as their passwords. They did so under the impression that the full NRIC number is secret. However, as shown by Dr. Tan Wu Ming in his question, there are now algorithms that can be found online that have made it easier to work out the full NRIC number from the partial or masked NRIC number. The easy availability of such algorithms means that the continued use of partial or masked NRIC numbers gives both organizations and individuals a false sense of security. This does not really keep the full NRIC number secret. This also makes the practice of using NRIC numbers as passwords even more inappropriate. To the questions by Dr. Tan, Mr. Liang Eng Hua, and Ms. Sylvia Lim, these developments led the government to take steps to stop the incorrect uses of the NRIC number. This meant 2 things. 1, not using the NRIC number as an authenticator, and 2, moving away from the use of masked NRIC numbers because it creates a false sense of security. We knew this transition would take time, but it was better to start while the problem is relatively contained and for the government to take the lead. To the question by Ms. Joan Pereira, we proceeded to ask agencies to stop using the NRIC number as an authenticator or as a password. We also asked agencies not to plan new users with a view to discontinuing existing users of masked NRIC numbers eventually. The lapse in coordination between agencies led to ACRA's misunderstanding and the disclosure of full NRIC numbers in the People Search function of its new BizFile portal. In hindsight, what we should have made clear was that moving away from the use of masked NRIC numbers did not mean automatically using the full NRIC number instead in every case. At no point was our intention to disclose full NRIC numbers on a wide scale. In place of masked NRIC numbers, in some instances, there would be no need for the NRIC number at all. In other instances, names alone or some other identifier would be sufficient. But there could also be instances where full NRIC numbers should be used instead of masked NRIC numbers. Each case would have to be assessed and decided individually. Members including Mr. Leong Man Wai, Mr. Liang, Mr. Xie Yao Quan, Ms. Jessica Tan, Mr. Dennis Tan, and Mr. Pritam Singh have asked about the internal processes leading to ACRA's actions. Minister Indrani will say more about it in her statement later and address members' questions related to ACRA. Ms. Cheryl Chan asked why the efforts to change did not include the private sector. The government knew that it would take time for public sector agencies to make the change. We expected that it would take even longer for the private sector because of long-standing practices and habits. The plan was therefore to change the internal practices of government before moving to change practices in the private sector and non-profit organizations, which Ms. Usha Chandradas asked about. We believed that doing so would allow us to better understand the implementation challenges and, as a result, facilitate a smoother transition in the private sector. We had also planned to mount a major effort to help Singaporeans be aware of the risks and to support efforts to stop incorrect practices. The BizFile incident was an unfortunate misstep, which now means these plans need to be brought forward. While we had taken steps to stop the incorrect uses of NRIC numbers in the public sector, we had not started implementation for the private sector. Mr. Edward Chia, Mr. Liang, Ms. Hazel Pua, and Mr. Xie have asked specifically what should be done in the private sector. At this stage, we would advise private sector organizations to do two things. First, private sector organizations that are using NRIC numbers as a factor of authentication or as default passwords should stop this practice as soon as possible. Second, private sector organizations that presently collect partial NRIC numbers to identify people can continue to do so. The guidelines for the private sector have not yet changed, and we will only consider how they should be updated after consulting the public. To questions by Mr. Xie, Mr. Melvin Yong, and Mr. Sharil Taha, we aim to start consultations soon and will provide details when ready. Our initial soundings with the private sector suggest there can be different approaches. Some organizations currently using partial NRIC numbers can stop the practice and replace them with alternative means of identification, such as mobile numbers or email addresses, or drop them entirely. But there are also organizations that need to accurately identify persons and can justify the collection of full NRIC numbers, even if they are not required by law. For example, preschool centers will prefer to collect the full NRIC numbers of visitors rather than just, say, mobile numbers. The parents will certainly feel more secure. In applications for and disbursements of substantial financial aid, persons would also need to be accurately identified. We will take these considerations on board when updating the guidelines. In any case, I would like to assure members like Ms. Jean Si and Mr. Ong Hua Han that the PDPC will support businesses in changing their authentication methods. This will include raising their awareness on why the use of NRIC numbers as a factor of authentication is unsafe and working through IMDA and CSA's programs to help businesses review and adjust their practices. To questions by Ms. Tin Pei Ling, Mr. Zulkarnain, and Dr. James Lim, I should emphasize that NRIC numbers are personal data. This means that organizations collecting and using NRIC numbers must continue to exercise a duty of care. Subject to applicable law, they must notify and seek consent on use and also ensure that the data is sufficiently protected. Certainly, they should not disclose the NRIC numbers unless there is good reason to do so. Members may also ask, if the NRIC number is not suitable as an authenticator, what about the physical NRIC card, our pink identity card? If we look at our physical NRIC card, we will see that it contains other identifying information, such as our photo and fingerprint. It allows others to check that the information on the card matches me, the person holding the card. In addition, the physical NRIC card is not easily faked. The physical NRIC card is therefore suitable as an authenticator or proof of who I claim to be. But someone providing my NRIC number and claiming to be me does not have these additional factors of proof. Organizations must know that the physical NRIC card and the NRIC number are different. The physical NRIC card can be an authenticator, but the NRIC number should not be used as an authenticator. Organizations should therefore not accept my NRIC number alone as proof that the person citing it is indeed me. Besides organizations, individuals too have questions about what they should do. There are also two things. The first is to clarify their understanding of the NRIC number. Members like Ms. Sylvia Lim asked about this. We have said that our NRIC number is like our name. Even if it is not widely disclosed, it is not secret. In our daily lives, if someone we don't recognize calls out our names and starts to behave as though they know us well, we would be at least slightly suspicious. We might be polite, but not too friendly. Certainly, we should not fully trust this person just because they know our name. This should also be how we treat anyone who tells us our NRIC number. We should not automatically assume that they know us well, or are figures of authority, or can be trusted. We should be cautious about revealing more about ourselves, or saying yes to their requests, or following their instructions without checking further. The second thing we can do as individuals is to review our passwords. If we have used our NRIC number as a password to access any information or service, we have mistakenly used it as an authenticator and should change the password immediately. Doing so will give us better protection against people who use our NRIC number to get access to information or services. It will also complement efforts by organizations to stop using the NRIC number as a factor of authentication. To Ms. Hanny So's question, NRIC-related scams are not new. Most NRIC-related scams involve victims who think they are speaking to figures of authority and end up taking actions that harmed themselves, such as transferring money without further checks. Very few cases have involved scammers directly using NRIC numbers to unlock access to valuables. Several members have also asked how to mitigate the risks when NRIC numbers are disclosed. They include Mr. Zulkarnain, Mr. Edward Chia, Mr. Christopher D'Souza, Mr. Ong, Mr. Liang, Ms. Jessica Tan, Mr. Louis Chua, Ms. Cheryl Chan, Mr. Sharil Daha, and Mr. Yip Hong Wing. As I have explained, the risks arise from the incorrect use of the NRIC numbers. If individuals stop using NRIC numbers as passwords and organizations stop using NRIC numbers as authenticators. This will go a long way to preventing harms from scams and identity theft. They will give us all better peace of mind to use the NRIC number whenever it is necessary, such as to get medical treatment or apply for jobs. So the government appreciates that the incorrect uses of NRIC number may not be well understood. Our public education efforts will raise awareness amongst organizations and individuals and to guide them on what they should do. In doing so, we will focus on the points I highlighted above. Mr. Gerald Giam asked about alternatives to the current NRIC number system. In fact, the risks do not arise directly from the structure of the NRIC number. Rather, the risks arise when the NRIC number, which is meant to be a unique identifier, is incorrectly used as an authenticator or a password. Even if we were to create an alternative identifier, we would still have a problem if organizations used it as an authenticator and individuals use it as a password. So let me now turn to questions about ACRA's exemption from PDPA requirements and the government's data protection measures. These were raised by Ms. Tin Pei Ling, Ms. Sylvia Lim, Mr. Satyandi Supat, and Mr. Patrick Tay. The government has always taken seriously its responsibility to protect the data entrusted to the public sector. The government's personal data protection standards are set collectively by the Public Sector Governance Act, or PSGA, and our own internal rules. So PSGA plus our own internal rules. The PSGA is aligned with the PDPA and adapted to the public service context. Our internal rules are comprehensive and take reference from international and industry standards. We also continually strengthen our data governance practices. ACRA is expected to comply with these rules and the PSGA, which are no less stringent than PDPA requirements. Regular mandatory audits are conducted to ensure that public agencies, including ACRA, comply with the standards for data protection and the security of ICT systems. The number of data incidents and their severity is published annually. In the most recent whole-of-government audit exercise on IT-related data security controls, there were very few significant findings, and all of them had been remediated by the agencies concerned. There has also been a reduction in data incidents of medium severity and above. Where necessary, we have also taken public servants to task, for example, in serious cases involving unauthorized disclosure or improper use of information. Members can be reassured that we take these rules and controls very seriously. We will continue to regularly review the safeguards to ensure that they remain relevant. So let me conclude. We understand the public's concerns about NRIC numbers. It was not our intention to make the full NRIC number widely disclosed, and we are not heading in that direction. NRIC numbers are personal data and can be collected and used only when there is a need to. Organizations that hold your NRIC number also have a duty of care. Subject to law, they must notify and seek consent on use and ensure protections. These are existing guidelines that will not change. What needs to change are the incorrect uses of the NRIC number. These include using NRIC numbers for authentication or as passwords. It is better to make these changes while the problem is relatively contained. Organizations and individuals can both help by taking steps to stop using NRIC numbers as authenticators or passwords. By taking action as soon as possible, we can increase protection for all of us. This will allow us to more confidently use the full NRIC number as a unique identifier whenever we need to do so.